So this chapter is titled Fright in the Forest. It's a pretty famous forest, so I'm sure many people have heard of this. It was, I think it's been there for like 60s, I want to say. It's been popularized in the 60s or something like that, and it's like, I think it's actually accessible as well to the public. I think there might be like, I don't remember, I've seen videos on it, like people actually walking into it. And I think there is like some warnings about when you get into the forest, from what I saw. Yeah, like as soon as you enter, like you can call this number and like mental health help that Japanese have put, because of how many bodies they probably discovered. So Japan's Okigara Forest sits northwest of Mount Fuji and sprawls over 34 square kilometers. The forest is so thick with foliage, it's also known as the Sea of Trees, and it has been the backdrop for spooky films, including 2016's aptly titled The Forest. Okigara's other name is the Suicide Forest, named for the devastating numbers of visitors who have entered and never left. As many as 100 people kill themselves amid the trees every year. In a dark turn, some claim this practice has been popularized by Seiichi Matsumoto's 1960 novel Kuroi Jukai, in which a heartbroken lover chooses to end their life in Aokigara. The twisted trees of the forest are so densely packed there is little room for wind to travel through. And as there is hardly any wildlife to speak of, it is eerily quiet among the branches. Visitors have recounted their feeling of unease and the stillness among the trees and the absence of sound. Sitting at the base of a mountain, the area is littered with cave openings and the forest floor is rocky, while the soil beneath is rich with iron, supposedly playing havoc with GPS systems and phone signals. Some believe this is demons at work and advise marking your way with ribbon or tape to ensure you escape from the thick, unforgiving forest. However, discoveries of deliberately cut tape causing wanderers to lose their way are thought to be the work of these demons. Many believe the mournful spirits of the dead, claimed by the forest, still linger among the trees. Japanese folklore suggests these vengeful spirits are liable to lure sad, lonely visitors deep into the forest, away from the path. One journalist who visited the forest recalled hearing a blood-curdling scream and hurriedly followed the sound only to find the body of a man who had been dead for some time. Other witnesses claimed to have seen white figures drifting between the trees, some allegedly having been caught on camera. Suicide is so common here that since the early 1970s, volunteers have patrolled the area in order to recover remains and return them to the world beyond the forest to be laid on rest. Should you enter the forest, you are certainly advised to stick to the paths. Grisly discoveries in the thick of the woods, such as clothing and personal belongings abandoned and claimed by nature, human bones and remains hanging from trees or strewn across the forest floor, suggest this is a place in which tourists should proceed with caution. That's the forest. Yeah, it's creepy. It's one of those places where I would love to go. At the same time, I wouldn't go. Well, never go, because, well, I think like it says, like, unless you bring something with you, to. Oh yes, that sounds good. uh, unless you bring something with you to track your path, it's just not gonna work. Videos I've seen is just people who were walking at night as well, so that doesn't help. So that made it way more spookier for me. But I did hear that there's some people died there to because they liked the idea or how they would go like that. I guess it's creepy, but it's a very peaceful way, if that makes sense. Think carefully about your children, your family, and your life is a precious gift from your parents. These are the warning words you'll get to read outside the entrance of the Okigara Forest in Japan. Okay, yeah, we heard of it. It's only less than 2 hours away from Tokyo. That's creepy. As per official records, around 105 bodies were discovered from the forest back in 2003, and most of them were severely decomposed or eaten by animals. All the modern technologies, such as compasses, mobile phones, fail here due to rich deposits of magnetic iron created by the volcanic soil in the region. According to people, the bodies of the people who commit suicide must not be left alone in the jungle, so forest workers bring them back, and these corpses are kept in a special room of the local forest police station. It is done because people believe that it's a bad luck for the suicide victims and their spirits cry and scream all night and move their own bodies. But that's what it said. It said that this journalist heard a man screaming even though he had been dead for like days probably. Don't leave the path and follow the signs. Don't ever venture alone. Always carry plastic tape or ribbon as marker. Avoid visiting during nighttime. So this one is an island that is just outside of Venice. It's called Island Ghost. Just outside Venice, in the lagoon on the way to Lido, sits a small island. Poveglia is thought to have been inhabited as far back as 421 and remained so until 1379, when residents fled due to war. In the late 1700s, the main island building was used to quarantine plague sufferers, many of whom perished, their bodies burned on giant pyres. By the 1800s, the building was in use as an asylum, where supposedly human experimentation took place, and the doctor is believed to have jumped to his death from the bell tower. The island has been abandoned since the 1970s, and locals make a concerted effort to steer clear of it. Few dare to set foot on Poveglia, and those who fish the nearby waters refuse to get too close to the island. For fear of dredging up bodies, many who have been brave enough to visit have reported hearing voices and screams and seeing ghostly shadows dancing on the walls. Visitors have claimed they have become possessed while on the island. With one recounting overwhelming feeling of rage and another noting what they described as an oppressive evil feeling. It seems that, in the minds of many locals, Poveglia's grim history of disease, torture, and suicide lingers on in the present. Oh, never mind, that's it. So I didn't know this one. It's short, I wish I knew more. But I'm gonna search it. Poveglia. Small island located between Venice and Lido in the Venetian lagoon. Smoke canal divides the island in two separate parts. The island first appears in the historical record in 421. Yeah, that's what I said. The mental hospital closed in 1968. And the island has been vacant ever since. Wow, okay. So it's not long ago. The surviving buildings on the island consist of cabana, a church, a hospital and asylum, a bell tower, and housing and administrative buildings for the staff. The bell tower is the most visible structure on the island and dates back to the 12th century. It belonged to the Church of San Vitale, which was demolished in 1806. The towers was reused as a lighthouse. The existence of an asylum on Pavia seems to be confirmed by a sign for Reparto Psichiatria, which is a psychiatric department, still visible among the derelict buildings. As photographed by Ransom Riggs in his May 2010 photo essay documenting his visit to Pavia. However, there seems to be no evidence of an alleged prison. 100,000 people died on the island over the centuries and were buried in plague pits. Sometime after the island had become a quarantine station for ships at Venice in the 18th century, a plague was discovered on 2 ships. The island was sealed off and used to host people with infectious diseases, leading to legends of terminal ill Venetians waiting to die before their ghosts returned to haunt the island. A doctor allegedly experimented on patients with crude lobotomies. According to reports most recently by the Travel Channel, the doctor jumped from the bell tower in the 30s after claiming he had been driven mad by ghosts. He later died. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. That report, titled Haunted History, also states that some restoration work has started recently, but that abruptly stopped without explanation. The island has been featured in shows like Ghost Adventures and Scariest Places on Earth. Well, anything with an asylum, it's just not right. Or not? Is it? I don't know, it's a video. Yeah, it does look abandoned. So, if people can get to it, does it mean there's like a ship that brings tourists back and forth or something? There are several large containers that may have been used to burn bodies. Well, that's probably what the pits for the plug were. You could tell even the taxi driver was scared. Not just of the police, but of the place itself. It couldn't get away quick enough. The island is so full of dark history as well. A lot of people died there, and you really get a sense of the horrors that took place there. They burned all the bodies, left them where they lay. The island has never really been cleared properly or anything, so everything's just been left. Not surprised. Spooky or not, I don't think Italians are bothered. Later, when it was turned into an asylum, and because people were shoved there out of the way of prying eyes, started to experiment. While we were there, we heard the bell toll, and that was quite spooky. That did actually freak me out. The whole place was just weird, eerie, although you could tell from the tiles and the archways. It would have been a beautiful building originally. You could see hardly anyone had set foot there for years because there is no graffiti or anything, it's just all natural decay. Nature has really taken over, and it was really typical of a horror movie with all the vines and creepers. Surprised no one's done a movie about her. A Wailing woman of Mexico City. Ooh, I'm gonna mispronounce that. Hey, Vlad. The district of Xochimilco. Probably. In southern Mexico City features a sizable network of canals, the last remnants of a vast water transfer system built by the Aztecs. Known as the Floating Gardens of Mexico City, The waterways harbor more than a couple of ethereal residents, the most famous being the Wailing Woman or La Llorona, which llorare means crying in Spanish. Legend has it that Maria, the whaler in question, caught her husband cheating on her and took revenge on him by drowning their two children in the canal. She immediately regretted her act but was unable to save them and, consumed by guilt, drowned herself. However, due to her murderous actions, she was unable to cross over into the afterlife, and instead doomed to roam the earth of eternity, plagued by perpetual grief. Sightings of a weeping, wailing woman, soaking wet and dressed in white, have been oft reported, with witnesses saying she cries out for her children. In a darker turn, some say she snatches young children from the waterfront as she walks, perhaps mistaking them for her own. The story of La Llorona is deeply rooted in Mexican popular culture and is told to children to encourage them not to go after dark, wander away from their parents, or play close to dangerous water. The legend has been referenced in many works of literature. Vlad says it sounds like a Japanese story. The legend has been references in many works of literature, theater, film, and music, and the theatrical production of the story is performed on the waterfront Xochimilco every year on November 1st, also soon, the Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos. Oh, that makes more sense then. The Wailing Woman aside, these waters are also said to be home to Nahuales, human spirits that have taken on animal form, often to perform magic or inflict harm on others, with reports of black jaguar-like creatures swimming underneath boats only to jump onto the river bank and bound into the woods. Among the waterways lies the hauntingly macabre island of dolls, or Isla de la Munecas, where grubby dolls in various stages of decapitation and mutilation hang from the trees. The story goes that a young girl drowned there, and the man who discovered her body later found the doll in the water where the body had been. As a mark of respect, he strung up the doll from a tree on the island. However, the man felt haunted by the spirit of the drowned girl, and so strung up more dolls in a bid to please her. She became increasingly demanding, and one day the man was found dead in the water, floating in the spot where the girl's body had been found. Today, hundreds of dolls swing from the trees in shrieks of disembodied laughter. Shrieks of disembodied laughter have been reported by many unsettled tourists. That's it. So there were just one story. There were a couple here. I do find it weird to. I get that there's culture around, Dias de los Muertos, in Mexico, which is really awesome, because it does kind of celebrates the dead. I mean, as you should. It's kind of strange that they would do the whole thing about this woman drowning kids. So yeah, let me type this on Google because I'm quite curious about these animals. Jaguars. Oh, so is the story, I'm guessing it's so old to be connected to these Aztec sculptures. So Nahual, no, that's it, that's pronounced Nahual, is a human being who has the power to shapeshift into their tonal animal counterpart. In English, the word is often translated to transforming witch, transforming trickster, or shapeshifter. The Nahual trait is acquired at birth, along with other characteristics associated with a person's birthday. Each day is associated with an animal that has a strong and weak aspects. A person born on Dog Day would have been a strong and weak dog aspects. In Hawaii, the word tonali is used to refer both to the day and to the animal associated with that day. So, kind of like Japanese Japanese associate the year of this animal, the year of that animal. And then there's the Isla de las Munecas, the island of the dolls. Oh God, I hate dolls. Dolls seen from the lake. Yeah, that's spooky. That's something you see in Resident Evil. The island was originally owned by Don Julian Santana Barrera. It's full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings covered with cobwebs and insects. The place was named in the 50s when the dolls started randomly appearing on the island. Santana was a neighbor of the Barrio de la Asunción, where he used to go to drink pulque after selling his vegetables, until he began preaching the Bible due to superstitions which led to him being expelled from it. In 1987, an eco-tourist rescue was made and the island was found covered with water lily. After the death of Santana, the Chinampa became a tourist attraction. The place began gaining fame in 1943 when Mexican filmmaker Emilio Fernandez filmed Maria Candelaria there. A significant number of international and local channels that featured articles on the island, including the Huffington Post, ABC, and Travel Channel. The dolls are still on the island, which is accessible by boat. The island was featured in the Travel Channel's show Ghost Adventures, the same one. The Amazon Prime show Lore, and was also featured on BuzzFeed Unsolved. Ew. I wouldn't even go if they paid me. Oh, hell no. Okay, so we have a small story about Swedish Spirits. Standing since 1876, the Borgavattnet Vicarage in Sweden is considered one of the spookiest buildings in the country. Since the late 1920s, strange occurrences have been reported at the house. And as one vicar and their family would move on, so the next vicar and their family would claim they had been subject to a variety of supernatural encounters. Residents and visitors have heard disembodied screams and encountered ghostly shadow people while washing, as apparently being ripped from the line and objects moved around. Okay. Perhaps most terrifying of all are testimonies that an old unoccupied rocking chair just kept on rocking on its own spooky volition. Explanations range from mistreated servants returning to enact their revenge to resident vicars of days gone by watching over the new residents. In the 1980s, a man of the cloth calling himself the Ghost Priest attempted an exorcism of the house, but as the spectral activity continued, one can only say he was unsuccessful. The vicarage now operates as a B&B. Are you brave enough to spend the night there? Okay. Borg. But. No, B&B. Can we find it? Okay, so haunted. B&B. It does seem like it's not being taken care of. 36 haunted hotels. There's 36 of them in the world. Jesus. Weird things have been noted in this personage, originally built in 1876. The grey wooden structure now serves as a bed and breakfast in a rural area with snowmobiling, fishing, and not a lot else. Residents of Borgvatnet I've claimed to hear footsteps, music, and the sound of 3 crying ladies coming from the inn, and the proprietors reward visitors with a certificate that says they stayed through the night. It's all ladies, isn't it? This is why you should be scared of women who come back to hunt you. Bergvatnet is a tiny village in the northeast of Jutland, Sweden. It only has 50 residents, a church, and a vicarage. Jesus Christ, 50 residents! That old vicarage is extremely haunted, perhaps even the most haunted place in Sweden. But that didn't stop the latest owners to buy it. They even turned it into a bed and breakfast. The first ghost stories came in 1927 when Vicar Nils Hedlund wrote about it in a letter. His mother Martha died in the house in 1907 during childbirth. His father, couldn't face the fact his wife passed away, and he buried her in the backyard. When the locals found out a couple days later, they demanded him to bury Martha at the cemetery. Per agreed, but the next day the whole Hedlund family had disappeared along with Martha's body. Nils came back to live at the vicarage after his father died. He saw all his laundry being pulled from the drying rack in the garden. There was no wind that day, and he could clearly see the laundry was being pulled. And he wasn't the last person to be affected by the hauntings. In 1930, Hedlund's successor experienced something strange. Vicar Rudolph saw a lady dressed in grey at the house. She was walking slowly towards him through the big hall, but decided to take the turn to the expedition room, the office where the vicars used to work. He wanted to talk to her, ask her what she was doing inside his house, but when he got to the expedition room, there was no one there. Otto Lindgren and his wife moved into the vicarage in 1936. They never saw an apparition, but they had loads of paranormal experiences at the house. They heard footsteps walking through the house, and doors were opening and closing as if someone was moving from one room to another. When they wanted to welcome the visitor, they saw nobody. Mrs. Lindgren had a strange encounter at the kitchen. She was home alone one day when she heard music coming from behind the closed door. She opened the kitchen door and the music suddenly stopped. The same happened again later when Otto was back home. Again, they heard music in the kitchen. When they checked it out, the sound suddenly stopped. Yeah, that's creepy. You can book the entire house. Feels like the Italian island doesn't look too bad now. Terror in the 10 Bells. The 10 Bells pub in London's East End is regarded as by far the most haunted hostelry in the capital. Built in the 70s, 40s, it has associations with Jack the Ripper's murders, among other horrors. The 10 Bells plays an important part in the Jack the Ripper story. His second victim, Annie Chapman, was said to have been drinking alone in the pub only hours before her body was discovered. Its third victim, Elizabeth Stride, was also known. Why does that name sound familiar? Was also known to frequent the 10 Bells. And final victim, Mary Kelly, was seen there with a friend the night before her murder. Several of the Ripper's casualties were discovered close to the 10 Bells, only adding to the grisly history of the establishment. Elizabeth Stride. Over the years, staff living above the pub claimed to spy a man in Victorian garb appearing and disappearing in the hallway, while others have complained of waking in the night, feeling uneasy, and turning over to find him lying next to them in their beds. At least it would disappear when they called out. Regular sightings of this ghostly figure are still being reported by customers and staff to this day. His identity remained a mystery until 2000, when a box was discovered in the cellar that contained items belonging to an ex-landlord of the 10 Bells, who was allegedly murdered, and his assailant never brought to justice. One landlord invited a psychic into the pub in order to assess the eerie goings-ons, only to discover one of the rooms had a tragic past. The psychic refused to enter the room on the top floor, claiming a baby had died there in the 1800s, under terrible circumstances. Many years later, a researcher was touring in the pub and noted something tucked behind the water tank up in the attic. Directly above the room, the psychic had refused to enter. She uncovered a sack containing old Victorian baby clothes, which disturbingly looked to have been cut with a knife. The ghost of Ripper victim Annie Chapman is also thought to haunt the 10 Bells, and to add to the chilling portfolio, reports of footsteps, disembodied laughter, and claims of being shoved on the stairs by an invisible hand have also been heard over the years. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it says anything about being haunted. Maybe it's because it's common knowledge that it's haunted? No. Renovated by John Twomey in December 2010 to display the pub's Victorian heritage. Cell Block Boo. Ottawa Jail in Ottawa, Canada was built in 1862 and conditions were harsh, with window spaces open to the elements. Inmates froze in the winter and sweltered in the summer. The jail closed in 1972 and soon after was converted into a youth hostel, but possibly the creepiest youth hostel around, which is still functioning today. Many original features have been kept, allowing guests to spend the night in a jail cell. Visitors can take things several steps further and opt to catch some shut-eye in solitary confinement, tour death row, visit the unmarked graves of forgotten prisoners, and pursue the original gallows. Reports from guests offer an insight into an experience they'll never forget. Many overnighters have awakened to a shadowy figure standing at the foot of their bed, often reading a Bible. Other guests have said they've seen a notorious hanged murdered in his old cell, or wandering the hall on death row. One woman woke with her arm in a phantom grip, and other people say they were hummed to all night, which was apparently an amazing experience, according to one guest. Before the days of the youth hostel, a corner of the courtyard was dug up in the 1950s to make way for bridge foundations, and 140 bodies of executed prisoners were discovered. One can only imagine how many more lie under the rest of the concrete, and where their spirits roam or might roam in the future. Do you notice how it's never like in 2000, I don't know, like after the early 2000s, there's not that many creepy stories. Like in 2021, no, it's always like the 60s or the 50s or the 1800s and whatever. Yeah, now it's more about conspiracies and stuff. Okay, so it's actually not affiliated with Ostelling International, but it's set to reopen next year. God, it says you don't need to commit a crime to go to prison. The first 7 floors of the jail were renovated into more hospitable hostel conditions. Well, I hope so. Today, guests can choose from a variety of shared and private jail cells, all which come with free Wi-Fi and free continental breakfast in the morning. Heavy wooden doors, they are the real deal, left from when the building was an operating prison. The hostel has been brought into the 21st century with a free Wi-Fi, keypad entry, and the bar in the basement, but much of it remains front and center. The rooms, while clearly larger than the original cells, are still contained behind iron bare doors. Jesus Christ. The stairs still have suicide bars on them, which would have prevented prisoners from drowning to their deaths. The showers are clean, the blankets are warm, and the mattresses are thicker than someone slept on, but you don't stay here for that. You stay here for the experience. On my first night at the jail hostel, I signed up for the nightly crime and punishment tour. Ran in conjunction with the Haunted Walk, this tour takes you to some of the unrenovated parts of the former prison. It gives you an idea of what it was like to be a prisoner here 100 years ago. The tour takes you first to solitary confinement in the basement and then heads up to the 8th floor. The floor with the most dark history in the building. The 8th floor, largely unrenovated and left to look as it did in 1972, is home to dark cells and few prison relics, as well as the death row and the gallows, which are still fully operational. The 8th floor tour began in just a regular jail hallway, where our guide Fraser explained what jail life would have been like. For the first few years the prison was in operation, there was no glass on the barred windows, and the prisoners slept without beds. I shivered as I imagined facing an Ottawa winter, narrow stone cell with nothing between me and the elements but a thin wool blanket. It's no wonder an undocumented number of prisoners died here. Jesus. Fraser also explained the Carleton County Gaol was such a model prison when it opened. Part of the reason was because of the design of the cells. They have what are called drum ceilings or arched ceilings that give the halls fantastic acoustics. As a guard, you could sit at the end of the hall and hear even the softest whisper from the cell further away from you. An Austrian guy named Michael and I tried this out. We didn't go in an old cell and whisper in something else that stood on the other end of the hall. I couldn't hear him clearly as if he were standing next to me. This of course means that this will not be a quiet or stealth stay, and quiet time begins at 11 in the cells each night for this reason. After heading to the other side of the 8th floor and getting a glimpse into the cells, they would have been shared by 3 or more people, we headed to the most sinister part of the building, death row. Canada no longer observes the death penalty, but it did up until 1976. 3 men were put to death at the Carleton County Gaol, 2 of whom may have actually been innocent. The most famous prisoner to die was a man by the name of Patrick Wailing. Wailing was accused of assassinating Thomas Darcy McGee in the 1860, and it was public opinion more than anything that convicted him. The evidence against Wailing was weak, but because McGee was considered one of the fathers of the Confederation in Canada and was a friend of the Prime Minister at the time, weak evidence was enough for a conviction. Wailing maintained his innocence until he was hung in 1869 in what would be Canada's last public execution. More than 5,000 people came in the middle of a snowstorm to watch Wailing die, and a miscalculation on the part of the hangman meant that instead of a quick death, Wailing took up to 7 minutes to expire at the end of his rope. He was denied his last wishes of having his body buried in his family grave in Montreal, and instead was buried in an unmarked grave in the prisoner's courtyard. No Catholic priest would come to conduct a funeral for him at the prison, and it said that Wailing's restless soul still haunts the jail. While the ghost stories shared on the tour were indeed spooky, the script for the tour was clearly rehearsed and memorized and fell a bit flat. I found the guide on the Crime and Punishment tour the night before to be much more engaging, and the facts shared on that tour to be much more interesting. For example, are you all curious about what offenses could have got you thrown into jail in the late 800s? Murder, cutting and wounding, common assault, aggravated assault, shooting with intent, attempt to commit suicide, breaches of the peace, insane, altering a no. What does that mean? Larceny, other offenses against property, drunken, disorderly, vagrancy. Yeah, it's like the article says, like you don't go there to have, like a cozy experience. So yeah, it was fun. Very spooky though. If you guys enjoyed the spooky stories and some house flipper, have a good night, and thanks for joining.